Good afternoon, everybody. I think that we will go ahead and get started with today's webinar. On behalf of the Mercer University Center for Career and Professional Development, welcome to our Fall Career Series webinar. This will be the last webinar for the fall semester. My name is Kim Meredith. I'm the Assistant Director for Mercer Center for Career and Professional Development. And at this time, all participants are in listen-only mode, and this webinar is expected to last 30 to 45 minutes. You may submit questions in the chat box. If you don't see that chat box option, simply mouse over the bottom of your Zoom window and the menu will appear. Questions will be addressed at the end of our presentation today. We are recording the webinar, so you'll have access to be able to view it later on our Mercer Center for Career and Professional Development YouTube channel. And I'll also send a link to the recording out to all the registrants. So let's go ahead and get started. So November 11th, it's today, it's Veterans Day. Today, Americans honor those who served our nation in uniform. These are our mothers and our fathers, our brothers and sisters, our children and our neighbors. Remembering their service helps repay the debt we owe them. Today's career webinar topic is inspired by our nation's 2019 Veterans Day. And we are so honored to have Rachel Coleman, our guest speaker, who has graciously accepted our invitation to speak to you today regarding veterans career tips. Please allow me to share a brief bio about Rachel before we get started. Originally from Pennsylvania, Rachel earned an undergraduate degree in education from Millersville University and went on to teach in the public school system in both Pennsylvania and Florida. While she was living in Florida, she completed a combined Master of Science Ed Specialist program in school and career counseling from Florida State University. While she was at FSU, Rachel worked in the Career Center there as an advisor, mock interview mentor, and instructor for the undergraduate career planning course. Following a move to New York, she spent over 6 years with the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, helping military service members navigate their career transitions. Rachel served as a career counselor with the Soldier for Life Transition Assistance Program, and then as a director of Career Services Program with the West Point Association of Graduates. In February 2018, Rachel relocated to Durham, North Carolina, to take a position with the Duke University Career Center, where she works now, serving the career development needs of graduate students at Duke. Rachel is a certified career counselor through the National Career Development Association, and she's currently co-chairing the NCDA Veterans Committee, which is a forum of career development professionals across the country who are focused on veterans' career issues. And having just joined that Veterans Committee myself, I met Rachel in 2016, and I have enjoyed getting to know Rachel over the past few years and have had the privilege to hear her speak before. She is so generous and such a collaborative colleague, a gifted career counselor, and she is truly a leader in our field. Welcome, Rachel. I'm so pleased to have you today, and I'm going to go ahead and forward this to the slides so you guys can see Rachel. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you so much for letting me be here.
Oh, we're delighted to have you today. I'm looking forward to some good content today. I'm hopeful that it will be helpful to you. So we've got a few goals for our webinar. We want to make sure that all the participants learn about the career services that are provided to you by Mercer. So certainly there is a few slides in here about some basic offerings that we want to make sure you know about. We're going to have you learn 6 crucial steps to propel you to your career goals. Learn how to find veteran and military-friendly employers, and learn how to create a distraction-free, customized resume that civilian employers will connect with. The Mercer Center for Career and Professional Development has locations, 2 of them in the Atlanta metro area, one on the Atlanta campus at Chamblee Tucker Road. The second one is in McDonough, Georgia, south of the city. And certainly we have our main campus career center located down in Macon, Georgia. And what I want to say before we bypass these slides too quickly is that any participant can take advantage of the career services that are offered at any of these locations face-to-face, even if you're a graduate and have already left Mercer, or even if you're a distance learner and you drive into one of these campuses, that's absolutely available to you. So the services that we offer really are just a robust menu of career consultation and counseling services. Certainly the number one thing people ask us about is resume development and job search, and we are absolutely experts at that and happy to help. But there's a long list of menu offerings that you can see here. I won't go through reading all of those, but the main message here is to make sure that you know that our Career Center is here to serve you. And of course, these services are free to all enrolled students as well as alumni. And right now at Mercer University, we have Handshake, which is a career development platform that's really known globally. It's not homemade or handmade at Mercer. It's really being used by employers and academic institutions of higher education across the nation. We are very pleased to have Handshake at Mercer. We got it July 1st, 2017. It has been a phenomenal tool. It is free to all students and alums. So if you're an alum participating or listening later, please do request your Handshake account. But enrolled students already have an account. It's a part of the suite of services that we give you at the time of enrollment. So you already have an account, and it simply takes that you log in and activate it. It's probably sitting there, if you haven't logged in before, waiting on you and eager to get your profile going. Now, Handshake offers a tremendous amount of job and internship services for you. Our team here at Mercer University, we are vetting and seeing about 2,500 new job and internship postings per month being made available to our Mercerians. That's a huge number. As you can imagine, that's a lot of vetting that we're doing on our side, because we don't just let employers come in and post opportunities without vetting them first. So you can trust that your Career Center staff is looking at these employers and researching them and making sure that they're offering bona fide and credible opportunities to you. I'm very, very proud that our team offers this. And again, these postings are in Handshake every day. So if you are a mobile on-the-go kind of person, I know you'll want to know about the free Handshake app. That's available to Android and Apple users, so feel free to download that if you want to get some alerts from Handshake on the go. And here's a big point about Handshake. If you've ever used Spotify or Netflix or some of these services that are using data intelligence to customize or curate information for you, that's the same data intelligence that Handshake is using. So the more you populate your profile, the more searches you conduct inside, the more you make an employer or jobs your favorite, the more you do in there, the more information Handshake is able to gather to customize and curate lists of employment that it thinks you're interested in. And it can even recommend to you students that are studying in your same discipline, or even alum who studied your discipline, and connect you to that individual or individuals. So that's really important. So please don't let your account sit dormant. You want to get in there and make your profile robust. And so these are some basics about Handshake. I don't want our whole time today to be all about that. I want to really have Rachel talk to you today. And I'm going to turn it over to her because she's going to talk about 6 crucial steps to propel you to your career goals.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Thanks again for allowing me to participate today. And I also just want to extend my gratitude to the military connected folks joining us for the webinar. Thank you for your service to our country, and I appreciate you allowing me to be part of your afternoon today. I believe Kim is going to be monitoring for any questions, so please feel free as we go through the webinar to type those in, and then we can certainly address those at the end of the webinar. But one of the things that we like to start off with, first steps that I think for anybody who's about to embark on any kind of career transition, be a transition into the military, out of the military, your first job, post-graduation, really these are the first crucial steps to take on as you think about that transition. So the first place we like everybody to start with is reflection. And I'm assuming if you have visited your Career Center, this is probably not new to you, but I think it's important to reinforce because if we are not deliberate and intentional with this step, it is often overlooked. It is often the thing that people think is it's common sense. Yes, of course, I know who I am and what I'm going for. But in reality, that changes. You know, your experiences, the trainings, your classes, all of these things may influence your career path. And you might be different now than who you were a year or two ago. So this is an intentional thing that should be done over time, repeatedly, to just take stock, take inventory of who you are and what you're interested in. This is also important because employers will expect you to be able to articulate this information. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through today's webinar, but please don't bypass this step. It really is one of the most important ones. Take advantage of your Career Center. As Kim mentioned, there are self-assessment tools available through your Career Services office, and they can help you clarify some of these things. So if you're not sure, you know, what are my strengths? What are my values? What's most important to me right now? Where do my interests seem to gravitate? There's resources out there for you for that. And it's also important to consider, you know, how are you going to test out? So wherever you want to go next, and I say next because we're not always planning necessarily for the next 20 or 30 years, but for your next steps, how are you going to test that out? How are you going to go through the prototype stage of really figuring out if the direction you want to go right now is going to be a good fit and it's something that's going to give you satisfaction in your career? Once you've got a clear sense of that, then it's really about building a plan, you know, developing your backwards plan. So thinking about what is my target, what is my goal, and how am I going to set smaller goals to work my way towards that? And what we know about effective goal setting is that it's habitual. So thinking about what is this going to look like on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So if I say my goal is to get a job in finance or logistics or whatever that goal is, what is that actually going to look like? You know, on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, how are you going to take smaller incremental steps to work towards that goal? And again, thinking about goal setting, when we break it down into those smaller steps and we find more ways to achieve those smaller steps, it's typically more motivating and it drives us towards that goal. It gives us some daily feedback or weekly feedback that we are working our way towards that goal. And lastly, when we think about first initial steps, but certainly not the least important, is to have a support system. And this is true in any facet of life, but especially in a career transition, and especially if you are looking to potentially change sectors or change industry, since it can get a little bit more complicated that way, definitely think about your support system. So you might just take a minute as you are going through that reflection to consider who's already in my support system. This could be family, this could be friends, fellow service members, faculty members, whoever it might be. But just thinking about who's already there and are there other people who I might want to recruit to walk this journey with me? People who might understand my experiences and then people who might be able to help me translate my experiences. Who do I want to bring into this system to really help me walk through this? And again, these are all crucial foundational elements to the entire process. So definitely recommend, if you've not had a chance to do that or you're not sure how to get started, to seek out your career services office so they can walk you through that more. And we can go ahead and move to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit more about that support system. Sometimes the word networking has a negative reputation to it because historically it's been viewed as very transactional. You know, you network with somebody if you want them to help you get a job. And we really want to flip that dialogue a little bit to more of relationship building. So I say all that to mean start early. It is never too early to start connecting with people. And especially if you are looking at transitioning from you know, one industry to another. So the last statistic I've heard is that around 50% of veterans want to change from what they were doing in the military to something different. And again, a career transition can be challenging no matter what, but if you are looking at switching sectors or switching industries, keep in mind that you might need to expand your network into a new industry where you don't already have connections. So definitely start that process early, connecting with professionals and hiring managers early in your career development process so that you have time to build relationships and sustain relationships so that it doesn't seem so transactional when you are in job or internship mode. Really important too to connect with a wide variety of people. So sometimes, and I think it's human nature, we tend to gravitate towards people who are similar, who have similar shared experiences as us, and it's totally natural and totally understandable, but there's a lot of benefit to expanding your network to other people, to a variety of people. So again, take inventory of your current network and think, how can I diversify my network a little bit? Is my network very military focused because that's been my network for however many years of my life? Can I find some civilian folks to bring into this to expand my network that way? So just thinking about and taking inventory about who's already there and who needs to be there. It's also helpful to think about who's missing from a personality standpoint, I've found. So do you have that person in your network who is your motivator? Do you have that person in your network who is your accountability partner? Do you have the person who can potentially advocate for you within an organization when you are ready to job search? So again, just personality-wise and role-wise, having a lot of different folks within your network, and thinking about them more of your community. We've shifted the language a little bit here at Duke to use the term career community as a way to think about it, because that's really, the direction that we want to go with it, as opposed to this very transactional feeling of networking. So there's some different ways that you can do that. Actually, if we can go back, sorry, I'm not quite ready to advance, Kim. Thank you. There's a couple of different ways you can do that. So if you are looking to connect with, fellow veterans and companies that value military service and have noted that, there's a couple of different things that you can look into. The Student Veterans of America, that is a national organization. They have a conference that you can go to. So that's a good way to get in with fellow student veterans that might be something of interest to you. For employers, there's a couple of different things that you can look at. There are employers that participate in the Veterans Job Mission. They sign a pledge that they are going to hire so many military connected individuals. So that might be a place to look to see how can I identify companies that have said they are interested in recruiting and hiring veterans. You might have already heard of Hiring Our Heroes, which is a program in place to help veterans find meaningful employment. And then companies can get rated on their military-friendly designation. And I just checked before the webinar, and the 2020 list is out. So I believe it's just militaryfriendly.com. That shows you how each organization meets or exceeds the benchmarks that they have set to qualify as military friendly. So that's something else to look at. Might there be organizations that are designated as military friendly? It might be good for me to connect with those organizations and connect with those professionals there. American Corporate Partners is another one, and I'll do my quick disclaimer. I'm not endorsing any of these, but these are resources that might be good for you to be aware of. American Corporate Partners is a nonprofit organization that helps connect veterans with corporate mentors within the field that you might be interested in. So American Corporate Partners could be another opportunity. There are LinkedIn groups specifically for military populations. There's all kinds of things out there that might help you just broaden your contacts a little bit more. So your military affiliated network can really help you, they're going to understand your experience obviously better than your civilian counterparts. And then civilian connections can help you identify how might I be able to translate this into a civilian setting, and are there going to be any perceived gaps in my experience that I might need to work on while I'm a student, or even after I graduate to get to where I want to be. And the last thing on this slide is just really important to stay organized. It's not uncommon that once you start networking and you're building connections for these things to kind of snowball, and you'll get more and more connections, which is great. That's exactly what we're going for, especially if you're asking questions of your network, like who else should I speak with? Or can you recommend another organization that might be a good fit for me? Those things will lead to more and more connections. So it's a good idea to really develop some kind of system to track those contacts and schedule follow-up times. I've seen people use Excel, I've seen people use their Outlook calendar, so whatever system works well for you, but maintaining your network can be just as important as developing it in the first place. Like I said, we want to avoid that very transactional feeling of only connecting with people when we need something. So if you're maintaining the relationship over time by sending periodic follow-up notes, LinkedIn is pretty good for this. They'll prompt you if somebody has noted what their birthday is, or if they got a promotion, if their company was mentioned in the news, like little ways to connect with them that aren't asking for anything. And that's how we can really maintain those relationships over time. Okay, next slide. So let's talk a little bit about resumes. One of the things that I like to point out about this is the goal is not to demilitarize the resume. I think that that's an important distinction, because the military is part of who you are. It's given you the skill set that you have to this point. You know, it's taught you a lot. It's made you the person that you are. So we don't want to take that out of the resume completely. That is not the goal. But what we want to try to do is make sure that the terminology is phrased in a way so that it's understandable by anyone who is reading your documents. So when Kim was saying minimize distractions, that's kind of what it is. If a hiring manager is unfamiliar with the terminology in your application materials, the less likely they're going to understand what your full potential is, which could lead to not getting an interview, or it could potentially lead to underemployment if you are brought into the company. So that's why this step is really important. Networking and connecting is definitely a huge part of the process, and making sure that your application materials are tailored towards the company or the industry is also important. So this takes a little bit of research, you know, finding out what's important to this company, what are the skills that they're looking for in their candidates, you know, what makes them tick, what is their mission, and tailoring your documents accordingly. Just finding out anything you can about them that might be useful to cite in either your resume or cover letter. You're probably familiar with applicant tracking systems. Those are the software systems that scan application materials for keywords. So that's why we advise as legitimately as you can, you know, to make sure that you are matching up to any themes that you're noticing from the position description. Keywords, short phrases that you think they might be looking for in the candidates. Can you legitimately include that information in your application materials? As we talk about terminology, you know, thinking about using translators as a starting point, I think there are some that might help you, even if the translation isn't exact to what you're looking for, but just to get the idea of other ways to phrase things and explain things. You might be familiar with ONET. ONET Online has a military crosswalk tool. Military.com has a translator that can talk about different ways to describe your military experience and some of those titles. Noticing leadership positions like NCOIC, XO. So just thinking about how can I describe that? Is it using different terms that could potentially fit, like manager, supervisor, director, you know, training specialist, those different kinds of things that might be a better fit, and something that might make a little bit more sense to a civilian hiring manager. For the, you know, organization size, brigade, squadron, platoon, I typically recommend using a numerical value in there to describe that, because numbers are pretty universal. So if you can say a 50-person organization, that's going to make a little bit more sense to most people reading the resume. That's pretty straightforward. So just thinking about those things. Again, it's not demilitarizing, it's not taking the military out of your application materials, but it's finding a way to make sure that what you have done can be clearly communicated. So that way, all of your skills, all of your value, all of the great things that you acquired from your service are related to the position. So think about transferable skills. That's really a big piece of this. Transferable skills and finding a way to explain different terminology. If there is not a direct translation to some of these things, and you know, depending on what you did in the service, there might not be, what I typically recommend is you can go ahead and leave the military terminology on there, but then just explain what it is. So for example, if you have a title, you know, a job title from your military service that doesn't really fit any kind of civilian translation, what you might do, and what I've seen a few people do successfully, is they will have their job title, the name of the organization, so U.S. Army, U.S. Navy, whatever your branch was, the location and the dates that you held that position. And then right underneath there, they have like a 2 or 3 sentence summary of what that role entailed. And that might actually help just to clarify, give the reader some context, and then underneath that brief summary paragraph, you can have your bullet point statements, your accomplishment statements. So if there's not a direct translation, don't feel like you have to force it, but then I would, give a couple of lines to explain what it is, so that way anyone picking up your materials can really get the full understanding of what you did. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about bullet points and accomplishment statements later on as we move forward with slides. But just a quick thing, if you have evaluation documents, that might be really helpful for you in developing some of these accomplishment statements. I'm going to give you a formula for that. But as I mentioned earlier, when we're talking about organization size, numbers tend to translate fairly easily. So if you can think about impact, did you increase something, decrease something by a percentage? Did you save time, money, personnel? Anything like that. Awards are also a great thing to be able to put on your resume. Those are accomplishment statements. But again, just make sure you explain what it is. Most people in the civilian workforce are not going to be familiar with the names of military awards. So just explain why you received it. And that should make it a little bit clearer to the hiring manager. Okay, next slide. So we're going to dig into each one of these areas a little bit more. We're going to talk about the benefits of a professional summary on the resume, using more of a skills-based combination format resume. Sometimes people call it a hybrid resume. And we're going to dig into these strong bullet points and accomplishment statements just a little bit more. Okay, next slide. So the professional summaries, again, this is my opinion, but I have seen them to be particularly helpful with people transitioning from a military service experience into more of the civilian sector. And the reason why is the professional summary is a nice way to capture where you've been, what you've been up to lately, where you're planning to go. And it's really a great place to highlight those transferable skills, as I mentioned earlier. So I have an example up here, just kind of a general example so you can see what one might look like. But as you can imagine, this section on the resume in particular can change pretty dramatically depending on how you're using the document. Because again, if the focus is on transferable skills, this is really a place to highlight what you've done that you feel relates best to the position. But it gives you a space to sum up everything that's on your resume. We hear that recruiters are looking at the resume somewhere between 4 and 7 seconds is usually the stat that we hear. So if we're trying to capture them early, this professional summary would go right underneath your contact block. So right underneath your name, email address, phone number, and then they would see this. And like I said, what's nice about that is you're catching your reader early. They can see early on what you bring to the table, and it's a nice summary of your experiences so far. So you can look at those. There's lots of examples out there that you can search, but this might be a good tool to help just summarize everything that you've done in the direction that you want to go next. Okay, next slide. So the other piece that I mentioned was this idea of a hybrid and combination resume. So if you're not familiar with this style of resume is different from what we traditionally see, which is the chronological resume. The chronological resume is just like what it sounds. You typically will have your contact block. If you're in school, then your education block would come next. And then usually after that is like an experience block. And you just list all of your work experience in reverse chronological order. So you start with your most recent and work your way back. That's typically what we see for resumes. This is a slightly different take on the resume in that we don't have that straight chronological format to the experience section. What the hybrid or combination resume allows you to do is emphasize the key skill areas that you think are most relevant to the position. So instead of having one big giant professional experience block, you break them down by categories. So in this case, this person must have thought that leadership experience was really important to the role that they were applying to. Rather than having that hidden within a large professional experience block that captures everything, they chose to break out the section. Here is one that's just about leadership. So you might have 3 or 4 of those. You might have, just depending on what the position is looking for, maybe project management, leadership, teamwork, and communication, just as an example. And then under each one of those headers, you have your accomplishment statements that demonstrate evidence that you have that skill or that you have that ability. So again, for people who might be more of a career changer or an industry changer, this can be a really nice way to focus in on the relevant skills that you think the employer is looking for, as opposed to having one big block of experience and then hoping that they will sift through and find what is most relevant to the position. So that might be something to consider as well. The way to do this is to look for overarching themes in the position description and consider those as your skill areas for the headers that you create. You would still have a work history section or something like that on this resume. That's what makes it a combination resume. There's still a very short category. It might be just work history. It might be the category header. And then you list very briefly your job title, employer, location, and the dates. That's it. And it's just a list of those different occupations of those positions that you've held. So the chronological work history is still noted, but it's not the main body of the resume like it would be in a chronological resume. So again, this might be something to consider. I just listed a few sample category headers up there. There's many, many more than what I have there. But just as an idea, as a way to really, again, emphasize those key skills, the relevant skills that you think the employer is looking for, and it cuts down on some of the work for them. It makes it very easy for them to see where that information is documented. Okay, next slide. Okay, so as promised, we want to talk a little bit more about those accomplishment statements. They can be really helpful. Most employers are operating off of the idea that your past performance is indicative of your future performance. So if you've done it well before, the assumption is you're going to do it well again. The strong bullet points, the impact statements, are your evidence of that. This is your opportunity to demonstrate evidence of this is how well I can do this. This is how I've done it before. So this here on this slide is a formula for how to create those strong bullet points. And if you have documentation from your military service, the ones that I would see when I was working at West Point were pretty good about including numbers and numerical values to things whenever they could. So that might be something to look back on as a way to think about how can I describe my experiences in more of an impact statement way. So you might want to consider this as well, recognizing that not every statement on your resume might lend itself to numbers or numerical values. That's totally fine. I work in human services. I get that you can't quantify everything, but if it's possible, it can certainly be helpful in making that connection to employers. Okay, we can, next slide. I have a brief example of noting how to shift from job responsibilities to accomplishment statements. And it's also an example of how to make some terminology switches, as you can see. So you can see in the top block there for the S3 position, there's a lot about job duties, like this is what I was assigned to do. And then if you look at the bottom where things are switched a little bit, there's more of a focus on impact and accomplishment. So you can imagine that's a little bit of a difference from a hiring manager's perspective of being able to relate to what you accomplished in the military. One of the other things that I forgot to mention earlier, depending on your branch of service, if you have a VMET, a verification of military experience and training, sometimes those can be helpful too, to have descriptions of what you did in the service. So that might be another document to refer to and just see if you can get some helpful things from that. There might not be one document or one resource that really gives you all the language that you need, but the idea is just to collect many different things and start to recognize what language do you feel comfortable? What language do you feel best describes what you accomplished during your time in the service? What is the best, most accurate description that you can give it? So again, I'm not necessarily endorsing any of these as the best way to do it or the right way to do it, but it is a resource for you that you can use and consider as part of your work here to make sure that your accomplishments are seen and valued in the civilian sector and not lost because of terminology issues or anything like that.
Hey, Rachel.
Yes.
Hey, you know what I noticed about these two examples as I was just sitting here reading them? I love how you broke this down. This is so, so important for career changers not to just recite all of their duties and responsibilities, but I was noticing the difference in the verbs. So if you look at the top example, it's submitted, completed, ordered, reserved. And then in the bottom where we have the accomplishment statements, notice the change in the order of the verb in terms of it being a higher order verb. We switched to saved and achieved, which completely communicates something entirely different, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and thanks for highlighting that. I think that's a great point. And I would often see military resumes where people would note something similar to the second bullet point on the bottom about a ranking that they achieved, you know, some ranking that they were acknowledged for. And what I appreciate about this example one is they put out of 5 business units. Because that was always what I asked was, well, how, out of how many? Because again, you're kind of giving people context. You know, how competitive was this? How difficult was this? Even thinking about any schools, specialized trainings that you completed, thinking about for the Army, if we're thinking about Ranger School, like talking about the percentage completion rate of people who go to Ranger School. You know, noting things like that can give people a much better sense of how challenging a situation was and what it took for you to be able to get through that. So just keep in mind those different things, and I think that can be really helpful. So Kim, thanks for pointing that out. I appreciate that. And we can go to the next slide. Okay, so the final point that I want to share with you this afternoon before we wrap up is just to touch on interviewing a little bit. And before we talk about interviewing strategies, I think it's important to keep in mind that interviewing is an opportunity for you to determine if the position will be a good fit for you too. And that's really important. If we take it back to that reflection piece that we talked about in the very first slide when I began, knowing what's important to you. We want an employment situation to be a win-win. You know, we want the employer to be happy. We want the employee to be happy. Everybody's going to work better that way. They're going to be more productive that way. So it's an opportunity for you to get a sense for, is this going to work for me? So knowing what's important to you. Is advancement really important to you? Is feedback really important to you? Is salary really important to you? Not that we recommend you bring up salary. You always let them bring up salary first, but just knowing again what's important to you so that as you go through the interview process, you have criteria to help you determine if this is going to be a good match, if it's going to be a win for everybody. You can do a little bit of this research before the interview, which is great, using something called informational interviewing, which is not job interviewing. It is talking to people for educational purposes. It's talking to them to learn about something in particular. Informational interviewing goes along with networking. It can be a very powerful tool to help you learn about different organizations and the roles that they offer, different paths that people have taken to get into those roles. Again, identify any skills gaps or perceived gaps that you might have moving into that position. So doing some research ahead of time can be really helpful. That way, when you go into the interview, you have so much information to come into the interview with. You're probably going to feel a little bit more confident because you already know some information about the company or the role. You're going to have a sense of what questions you want to ask. You know, you can mention the informational interview, which shows the employer that you've already done a lot of research, that you care this much about this position. So there's some pre-work that you can do prior to the interview as well. But when you get to the interview, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. First, nonverbal communication is just as important as verbal communication. Depending on who you ask, it might be more important than verbal communication. So just a couple of things. We talk about having, you know, a nice firm handshake, a handshake that's firm but not too hard. Eye contact, I always like the 80-20 rule, where you're making eye contact with the person about 80% of the time, and then 20% of the time looking to the side or something else. Looking interested, looking engaged, those are all really important things to keep in mind for your nonverbals. And then obviously your verbal, that's going to be communicating effectively, and that's where we come back to being able to articulate the value that you think you'll be able to contribute to an organization, How much do you get behind their mission? How strongly do you feel about their mission? Those kinds of things that are really going to help connect to the company. It's a good idea to know your strengths and weaknesses going into these conversations. It's not an uncommon experience to be asked that directly, but just being able to articulate those things. So a strategy that I have recommended before is to make a simple T chart, a T on a piece of paper, and based on any informational interviews you've done and the position description, what is the company looking for? What does the role require? And then on the other side of the T chart is, what do I have? And this can be a simple way to assess any gaps that you might have and develop a plan for how you're going to address that. So maybe they want, a bachelor's degree and 6 years of experience, and you have a bachelor's degree and 5 years of experience. How will you address that in an interview if it comes up? So just helping you to be prepared for that. And then STAR, if you've went through any of your branches transition programs, this probably looks familiar to you, but it's just to help you have a sense for how to organize your interview responses. Using something like STAR or CAR, which is challenge, action, result, some variation of that. The reason we recommend something like this is because often the result is what is forgotten. And if we think about it from the employer's perspective, what's most important to them is probably the result. So having a tool like this to help you, a framework to help your responses can help make sure that you hit on all of the salient points and you hit the things that are most important to the employer. Asking good questions is really important as well. Sometimes we think that it's most important how we answer questions, but employers definitely take note of the questions you ask. So whatever research you've done going into the interview itself, you might have a couple of questions prepared, and then based on what transpires during the interview, you can process that information and determine if you have some additional questions around that and have those ready to ask at the end of the interview. So usually we recommend about 2 to 3 questions that you have prepared for the interviewer, and that just shows that you're engaged, that you want to learn more, that you care about what's happening during the interview, and that you're prepared. So having questions can be just as important. I said the only questions we tend to shy away from are those related to salary and benefits. We tend to defer to the employer to bring those up, but it's still good to be prepared in case they ask you what your salary requirements are. So going back to think about what's most important to me. What do I want to know at this stage to decide if I want to pursue this company further, if they're going to be a good match for me? Is there alignment between their values and my values? Is the mission something that I can get behind? Does it seem like there's opportunity for advancement? Does it seem like I am going to have my frequent feedback that's important to me? Whatever's important to you, but just to have that ready for the interview. And then practice is the last thing noted on here. Practice is huge. As with most things, interviewing is a skill. It is not something that we're born knowing how to do. So it is a skill that can be acquired. It is a skill that can be developed. So make use of the practice opportunities you have. Practice with your career services people, practice with fellow service members or veterans that you have as part of your network, practice with civilian counterparts as part of your network, all the people that can help you walk through and say, that was clear. I didn't quite understand what you meant by that. I felt like you could have described this a little bit more, just people to help you. And as with the resume, if you're getting feedback on your documents, you're probably going to hear a lot of different things from different people. But keep in mind those themes. What are some commonalities that you're hearing from the different folks who are helping you out, and what do you want to take from that? But one of the things I always tell students and everybody that I've worked with in career services, I always say that the first time you have these conversations should not be with an employer. The first time that you interview, it shouldn't be with an employer. It should be with some practice that you've had before. The first time you negotiate something, salary, benefits package, whatever it might be, there should have been a practice session before that. So just to work it all out to make sure that you feel confident in your language, you feel confident in your approach, definitely make use of tools that are available to help you practice.
I'll interject there, Rachel. Here at Mercer, you may already know, but we have a tool called Big Interview. Big Interview is a free interview preparation and practice site. I really love it. We've had it for about 2 years, It's free to all students and alum, but you do have to create an account. The link, the secret link that is your passageway to Big Interview, lives inside of your Handshake account. It enables you to do mock interviews using your webcam, and so no one sees you stumble. No one sees you in these practice moments. You can delete the videos and re-record them. There are hundreds of practice questions inside of Big Interview, along with even written content to guide you on how interviews go, and just learning that, like she said, it's a skill. So I love Big Interview and want to just give a good shout out for that tool.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. And again, thinking about, just to touch on the question aspect a little bit more, you know, if you're looking for companies that are, you know, military friendly, veteran friendly, whatever they're using to describe that, that's another question that you could potentially ask during an interview if that's something that it's important to you. You know, if they are military friendly, you know, can you tell me a little bit more about what that looks like within your organization? To find out, do they have veteran affinity groups? You know, what does that actually look like? What support systems are in place? Again, if that's important to you, that can give you a sense for what that actually looks like within an organization. So it can be difficult to tell sometimes based on the information that's on the company website. So again, asking questions can really give you that inside knowledge as to what that environment, what that atmosphere might be like. Okay, so last slide for me, I think, is up next. So just to recap what we talked about, reflection, and be intentional with that, be deliberate. It's too easy to let that step fall to the wayside. It's too easy to fill up our calendars with other things. So when I was working at other places doing career services, I had one person who would deliberately put a weekly meeting on his calendar to block the time, because that was his meeting with himself. That was his time to just think about his career transition and what he wanted to do next. So blocking that time and being deliberate. I recommend journaling to people. I have a lot of students I work with now who journal as a way to capture their reflections and what they think about the different experiences that they have and how they're going to use that information. Find a system that works for you, whether it's, you know, using some kind of technology or handwritten journal, whatever works. But just a place to capture that and a place that you can refer back to as you go through this process, figure out how you want to use that information. Have a strategy, have short and long-term goals. Think about what smaller interim goals are going to work you towards your big goals. What's that going to look like on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? Make it habitual. Recruit your support system. Like I said, it's not only going to help you while you are a student, it's going to help you beyond that. It's going to help you in a lot of different ways that go and extend far beyond career. Always just good to have a support system. Build that network. It's never too early to start doing that. And it's not something you're ever going to stop doing. Even when you land your first position, it's still a good idea to keep your network alive. Talk to people, even if it's from a professional development standpoint, if it's from a collaboration standpoint, but always keep that network alive. It's just good practice. Build your resume, one that works, get a lot of eyes on it, get a lot of perspectives on it. You'll probably hear different information, but look at those themes. What am I hearing across the board that might help me make this a stronger resume and be the best demonstration of myself I can put on paper that's going to clearly communicate my value that I can contribute to this role. Start practicing interviewing. That's something that is really important. I said, don't wait until you have the interview scheduled. You can start developing those skills now, developing a strategy around your whole search. These are all things that you can do before you even submit any applications. Just have a plan, do some practice, and that way, hopefully, when the time comes, you'll feel much better prepared, more confident to work through any issues that might arise. So with that, I think that closes out my part. Again, I just want to, I know we're going to go to questions here, but I just want to reiterate my thanks and appreciation for being able to spend some time with you all this afternoon. I hope that was helpful in giving you some initial steps to consider, and we can go ahead and look at questions.
Awesome, Rachel, thank you. And you know, before we leave this summary slide, I was taking notes and really absolutely loving what you're saying and what advice you're giving. I think I want to just go back to what she said. small steps to your goal. Okay, sometimes the goal can seem so large, and I know I have a lot of students coming in right now that are already thinking about their graduation in May, and so it's like, okay, I'm a senior, the year is here, and it seems big, but I love the advice of booking an hour on your calendar from the previous client that you'd worked with. That's great advice, but I think I just wanted to accentuate her point about small steps. Career development is a lifelong process, and career is not a destination. It's truly a journey. And I want to just also pull out a point here about networking, that the Mercer Center for Career and Professional Development is here to help you. We have alumni connections that we could possibly facilitate, as well as employer recruiter connections, so don't hesitate to reach out. I always tell candidates who are applying for jobs, there's more to do after you click the submit button, because that's not the time to just sit back and wait and see what happens. That's, again, the time to activate your network. Hopefully you've been following Rachel's advice and keeping your network maintained, so that your network clearly knows you don't just call on them when you need something, but after you click submit on a job application, it's also a good time to keep going with your networking. If we can help you, we want to do that. Handshake can also help with that. So if there are any questions now, we'll look in the chat box for that for just a brief moment. I don't see anything in the chat box yet, and I think some of our participants have clicked out already, Rachel. So is there any last point you wanted to make?
No, I don't think so. I hope that this was helpful. I hope I am a resource and a perspective in this. I know I'm talking from my experience, obviously, but I hope between the blend of having some time, in a military environment and a career counseling background, that you found some of those tips helpful. I'm happy to be a resource in any way that I can. I know you've got a great team there, but this is something that I care very deeply about. So if I can be a resource for anyone here on the webinar, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you so much, and thank you for sharing your expertise with us, Rachel. I too hope that these tips will benefit the lives of our veterans and military connected students. And please know the Mercer University Center for Career and Professional Development is ready to meet with you, ready to help you with your career goals during your enrollment, but also for life after graduation. We want you to connect with us. We want you to come in and make an appointment. And sometimes coming in may mean a virtual appointment. In fact, I'm doing more and more of those using Zoom, the very tool that we're using today. It works very nicely for screen sharing and looking at resumes and job announcements together. So please don't let location and miles be a barrier, and also connect with us via social media, where we communicate happenings like today's webinar and other career events, along with Handshake activity as well. And again, our website is career.mercer.edu. Happy Veterans Day. And just a side note too, to celebrate, November is National Career Development Month. So how about planning some deliberate moments on your calendar for intentional career development and planning? Stay committed to your career development goals, okay? Have a good one, everybody. Thanks for joining.